Hi there, I'm Emily Mielstein with the Gulf of Mexico Fishery Management Council, and this is a public hearing video on Coastal Migratory Pelagic Amendment 32 that considers modifications to the Gulf of Mexico Migratory Group Cobia catch limits, possession limits, size limits, and framework procedure. So Gulf Group Cobia is jointly managed by the Gulf of Mexico and South Atlantic Fishery Management Councils. Gulf Group Cobia extends throughout the Gulf of Mexico and then actually around the Florida Peninsula up to the Florida-Georgia state line. Gulf Group Cobia includes two zones: the Gulf Zone, which terminates at the border between the Gulf and South Atlantic Council jurisdictions, and then the Florida East Coast Zone, or the Flexzone, which is located on the east coast of the state of Florida. Atlantic Group Cobia, which starts above the Florida-Georgia line on the east coast of the United States, is managed by the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. Gulf Group Cobia, which includes both Gulf and Flexzone, has a year-round fishing season. Both commercial and recreational sectors are subject to a daily possession limit of 2 fish per person, and that is regardless of the number or duration of trips. In the Gulf Zone, there is a 36-inch fork length minimum size limit, and in the Flex Zone, there is a 33-inch fork length minimum size limit. Now, the Gulf Zone and the Flex Zone of Gulf Group Cobia are managed a little bit differently. First, there is an apportionment of the acceptable biological catch that splits the Gulf Group acceptable biological catch between the two zones. The Gulf Zone gets 64% of the ABC, and the Flex Zone gets 36% of the ABC. Now, the Gulf Zone is also managed with a stock annual catch limit that combines both commercial and recreational sector harvest. There is a 10% buffer used to establish the annual catch target in the Gulf Zone, and we also have an in-season accountability measure in the Gulf Zone that when an annual catch target is reached, the season is closed. Now, in the Flex Zone, there is an allocation between commercial and recreational sectors. 8% of the annual catch limit goes to the commercial sector, and 92% of the allocation goes to the recreational sector. There is a buffer for an annual catch target on the recreational sector in the Flex Zone, and that is currently a 17% buffer based on an equation that we'll show you in the alternatives to come. The commercial and recreational sectors have different accountability measures. For the commercial sector, the in-season accountability measure is when the annual catch limit is reached, the sale of cobia is prohibited for the remainder of the year. And then there's also a post-season accountability measure for the commercial sector that if cobia is considered overfished and the total annual catch limit is exceeded, then the following year's annual catch limit is reduced by the amount of the overage. There is a recreational accountability measure that is only a post-season accountability measure in the Flex Zone, and that is if the annual catch limit is exceeded, then the following year's season is reduced to achieve the annual catch target. There is also an overall accountability measure in the Flex Zone that if cobia is overfished and the annual catch limit is exceeded, then the following year's annual catch limit and annual catch target are reduced by the amount of the overage. So you might be wondering why we're here. Well, we did receive a stock assessment on cobia. It was a CDAR 28 update assessment, and we got that in 2020. The terminal year of data that was used in that assessment was 2018, and that assessment did a couple of things. First, it updated our recreational catch data from the old MRIP CHTS to the new MRIP FES. Now, adding that new recreational catch data adjusts our estimates of recreational harvest back in time. It shows us that recreational landings are greater than we previously thought, and this impacts the apportionment between Gulf and Flex zones. That assessment also showed that the stock is undergoing overfishing with a biomass at reduced levels, and that puts the cobia stock at risk of becoming overfished if we don't change our management measures. Finally, the assessment showed us that the stock has experienced overfishing every year from 1975 through 2018, with the exception of just 2 years, 1983 and 2009. So the Council's scientific and statistical committees met, and they made some recommendations. First, our catch levels require approximately a 33% decrease in yield. What's interesting here is because of the conversion between the old and the new recreational data collection programs, resulting catch limits appear higher than current catch limits. But if you put our current catch limits and you convert them to the new data currency, then you'll see that the current annual catch limit actually exceeds our newly recommended acceptable biological catch. And that's displayed in this table below. Additionally, we've seen Gulf Group Cobia landings decrease in both zones since 2011. And the for-hire and recreational fishermen Additionally, Gulf Group Cobia landings have actually decreased in both zones since 2011. And for-hire and recreational fishermen have been reporting a decrease in the presence and the average size of Gulf Zone Cobia. So the councils need to take action to end overfishing of Gulf Group Cobia as required by the Magnuson-Stevens Act. And we also need to update existing Gulf Group Cobia catch limits so that they are consistent with the best scientific information available and those contemporary data collection methods, that MRIP FES. We also need to clarify the Gulf and South Atlantic Council's responsibility in the Coastal Migratory Pelagic Framework Procedure, and we will address that in the final action of this document. So there are a lot of different actions being considered in this document. I'm going to walk you through each action and the different alternatives that are being considered. We'll start with Action 1, which looks at modifying the Gulf Group Cobia stock overfishing limit, acceptable biological catch, and annual catch limits. So the councils must consider adjusting the Cobia overfishing limits and acceptable biological catch levels to be consistent with those scientific and statistical committee recommendations. Since the current MRIP FES equivalent total annual catch limit of 4,500,000 pounds exceeds all of the newly recommended acceptable biological catch levels, the council must also adjust the Cobia annual catch limit. Our first alternative is the no action alternative, and that would retain the current Gulf Group Cobia stock overfishing limit, acceptable biological catch, and annual catch limits as implemented in 2015 by Amendment 20B. Now, it's important to note that this is not a legally viable alternative because it's not based on the best scientific information available. The second alternative is the council's current preferred alternative, and that would modify the Gulf Group Cobia stock overfishing limit, acceptable biological catch, and annual catch limit based on the recommendations of the council's scientific and statistical committees for an increasing yield stream for 2021 through 2023 and beyond. The stock annual catch limit is set equal to the stock acceptable biological catch in this alternative. And finally, Alternative 3 would modify the Gulf Group Cobia stock overfishing limit, acceptable biological catch, and annual catch limit as a constant catch value for 2021 and subsequent fishing years. And again, in this alternative, the stock annual catch limit would be set equal to the stock acceptable biological catch. And this table here at the bottom will just show you a comparison of the catch limits by alternative in this action. We'll move to Action 2, which considers modifying Gulf Group Cobia stock apportionment between the Gulf Zone and the Florida East Coast Zone, or that Flexzone. So our current apportionment of Gulf Group Cobia between those two zones is based on the old MRIP CHTS landings, and they use the years 1998 through 2010 to create that apportionment. The MRIP FES landings, those new recreational landings, indicate a slightly greater proportion of landings can historically be attributed to the Gulf Zone. So the councils must consider adjusting the apportionment between the two zones to be consistent with the best scientific information available. Also, the zone annual catch limits in this action would be based on the Golf Group Cobia annual catch limit that is selected in the previous action, or Action 1. So our first alternative is the no action alternative, and that would retain our current Golf Group Cobia apportionment, where 64% of the annual catch limit goes to the Golf Zone and 36% goes to the Flexzone. And that's based on those old MRIP CHTS landings for the years 1998 through 2012. Now, it's important to notice that this is not a legally viable alternative because it's not based on the best scientific information available. Our second alternative would retain the Golf Group Cobia stock annual catch limit apportionment between the zones at that 64% Golf Zone and 36% Flex Zone. And it would use the apportionment to update both zone annual catch limits using MRIP FES units based on the Golf Group Cobia stock annual catch limits that are selected in Alternative 1. The third alternative is the preferred alternative, and that would modify Golf Group Cobia stock annual catch limit apportionment at 63% for the Golf Zone and 37% for the Flex Zone, based on those new MRIP FES average landings for the same years, 1998 through 2012. Would also use this apportionment to update the zone annual catch limits based on the stock annual catch limit that's selected in Action 1. And finally, Alternative 4 would modify the apportionment of the annual catch limit between Golf and Flex zones based on MRIP FES average landings for the years 2003 to 2019. The resulting apportionment would give us 59% to the Golf Zone and 41% to the Flex Zone, and would also use this apportionment to update the zone annual catch limits based on the annual catch limit that's selected in Alternative 1. And this table simply shows you a comparison of the alternatives in this action based on the selection of preferred alternative 2 in Action 1. Okay, on to Action 3, which looks at modifying the Flexzone Cobia allocation between commercial and recreational sectors. So the current Flexzone allocation is based on the South Atlantic Council's allocation formula for Atlantic Group Cobia, which is based on MRIP CHTS landings and balanced historical catches from the years 2000 to 2008 with more recent landings between 2006 and 2008. And you can see in blue the equation that they use. The MRIP FES landings incorporated into the newest stock assessment indicate an increase in the proportion of recreational landings. So the councils have to consider adjusting the allocations in the Flex Zone to be consistent with the best scientific information available. Note that sector allocations will be based on annual catch limits and apportionments that are selected in Actions 1 and 2. Alternative 1 is the no action alternative. That would retain the current Flex Zone allocation of 8% commercial and 92% recreational based on the South Atlantic Council's allocation formula for Atlantic Group Cobia. Now, it's important to notice that this is not a legally viable alternative because it's not based on the best scientific information available. Alternative 2 would modify Flexzone Cobia annual catch limit allocations to 5% for the commercial sector and 95% to the recreational sector based on the South Atlantic Council's allocation formula for Atlantic Group Cobia, which balances those historical landings by using the years 2000 through 2008 and then more recent landings 2006 through 2008. But this alternative uses MRIP FES data. The third alternative, which is the Council's preferred alternative, would retain the Flexzone Cobia annual catch limit allocation of 8% commercial, 92% recreational, and update the annual catch limits selected in Action 2 based on MRIP FES landings. Alternative 4 would modify Flexzone Cobia allocations to be calculated based on maintaining the current commercial annual catch limit, which is 70,000 pounds, beginning in 2001 fishing season and allocating the remaining revised total annual catch limit to the recreational sector. These allocation percentages would remain in following years. And now we move to action 4, which looks at updating and or establishing annual catch targets for golf group Cobia zones. Currently, the golf zone annual catch limit equals 90% of the golf zone annual catch limit. The Flexzone recreational annual catch target equals 83% of the Flexzone annual catch limit based on the equation shown in blue. There's 3 alternatives here. The first is the no action alternative, and that would maintain our current annual catch limit, annual catch target buffers. The second alternative is the preferred alternative, and that would use the Golf Council's annual catch limit, annual catch target control rule to calculate annual catch targets for both golf zone and the recreational sector in the flex zone. And then alternative 3 considers establishing an annual catch target for the commercial sector in the flex zone by using the Golf Council's annual catch limit, annual catch target control rule. And this table shows a comparison of the different alternatives and the annual catch target buffers that would be created through each alternative. Now we'll look at action 5.1, which looks at modifying possession, vessel, and trip limits in the golf zone specifically. So right now, the commercial and recreational daily possession limit for Cobia in the golf zone is set at 2 fish per person, regardless of the number or duration of trips. There is no commercial or recreational trip or vessel limit either. The councils are considering options to reduce harvest mortality and constrain golf group Cobia harvest to the annual catch limit. While you might think that reducing the number of legal-sized cobia retained per trip would constrain harvest of golf group Cobia, analysis actually shows that the reductions have minimal effects because landings are low and most trips land less than 1 cobia anyways. Our first alternative is the no action alternative. Our second alternative is the council's preferred, and that would reduce the daily possession limit to 1 fish per person, regardless of the number or durations of trips, for both the commercial and recreational sector. And you can see that we have preferred options 2A and 2B selected. Alternative 3 is also a preferred, and that would create a recreational vessel limit, so fishermen may not exceed the per person daily possession limit of 2 fish per trip. We also have options 3B and 3C, which would consider a vessel limit of 4 fish or 6 fish per trip. And finally, alternative 4 is also considered preferred, and that would create a commercial trip limit where fishermen would not exceed the per person daily possession limit, and there would also be a trip limit created of 2 fish, which is our preferred option. Also, we can consider option 4B, which would limit our commercial trips to 4 fish, or option 4C, which would limit commercial trips to 6 fish. And this table shows an estimated percent reduction in golf zone cobia landings generated based on data from 2017 through 2019 landings. Next, we move to action 5.2, which looks at modifying the possession, vessel, and trip limits for the flex zone. So right now, the commercial and recreational daily possession limit in the flex zone is 2 fish per person, regardless of the number or duration of trips. And there is no commercial or recreational trip or vessel limit. The first alternative is the no action alternative. The second alternative is a council preferred, and that would reduce the daily possession limit to 1 fish per person, regardless of the number or duration of trips for both the commercial and recreational sectors. Alternative 3 is also preferred, and that would create a recreational vessel limit of 2 fish, which is our current preferred option. We could also consider creating a vessel limit of 4 fish per trip or 6 fish per trip. Next, we'll consider action 6, which looks at modifying the golf group Cobia minimum size limit. Right now, the minimum size limit in the golf zone is 36 inches fork length, and in the flex zone, it's 33 inches fork length. In general, an increase in the minimum size limit is expected to reduce the harvest rate and potentially the total harvest catch. Alternative 1 is the no action alternative, and that would keep our current size limits in both zones. Alternative 2 is the preferred alternative. That would retain the current recreational and commercial minimum size limit of 36 inches fork length in the golf zone and increase the recreational and commercial minimum size limit in the flex zone to 36 inches fork length. Alternative 3 would increase the recreational and commercial minimum size limit to 39 inches, and you can consider that for either the Golf Zone or the Flex Zone or both. And Alternative 4 considers increasing the recreational and commercial minimum size to 42 inches fork length for either the Golf or Flex Zone or both. And this table shows the estimated percent reduction in commercial landings based on the proposed alternatives. And this table shows the estimated percent reduction in recreational landings based on the proposed alternative. Finally, we look at Action 7, which considers modifying our framework procedure. So our framework procedure provides a standardized procedure for implementing management changes pursuant to the provisions of the Coastal Migratory Pelagic Fishery Management Plan, which is managed jointly between Gulf and South Atlantic Fishery Management Councils. The councils would like to update the language in the framework to match our current management practices and to consider expanding South Atlantic responsibilities for managing the Flex Zone. Alternative 1 is the no action alternative, and that would leave things as they are. Preferred Alternative 2 would modify the framework procedure to expand the South Atlantic responsibilities for the Flex Zone Cobia by allowing them to set vessel trip limits, closed seasons or areas, gear restrictions, per person bag and possession limits, size limits, and in-season and post-season accountability measures, and finally specify annual catch targets or sector annual catch targets via framework action. So that concludes a summary of what's being considered. We would really like to hear your input before taking final action on this document. The Gulf Council plans to take final action in October, and then the South Atlantic Council plans to take final action in December. We would like for you to submit your comments to us online using this link, or you can simply email us at gulfcouncil@gulfcouncil.org. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this presentation and send us your thoughts.